Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome everyone to this webinar. I am Pascal Chariot, I am the president of Enerdata, and I'm very happy to introduce this webinar, which is the first one proposed by our new clean tech team. This new team is the result of the acquisition we recently did of the Enerdata company. And I just wanted to comment this because that's quite important in our evolution. Looking at our competencies and the expectation of our partners and customers, we consider very critical to develop our ability to analyze all these clean tech markets and potentials. So that's why we did this move, and welcome to the Enerdata team, now called the clean tech teams. And hydrogen being obviously one of the key topics in this clean tech field, we are very happy to propose you this first insight on hydrogen, which will focus on the value chain and the company actors analysis. So welcome to this webinar, welcome to the clean tech team, and enjoy this webinar.
Thank you, Pascal. So we will start our presentation. Basically, we have around 30 minutes of presentation, followed by 15 minutes of question and answers. So feel free to write some question in the display interface, in the Q&A interface of your of this webinar, even while we are presenting, and we will address those questions at the end. So thank you, Pascal, for introducing our team. The clean tech team, we are basically a team working on any type of new technology in the field of clean energy, and in particular hydrogen. So I have today in my team Alice Jacquet that will co-host this webinar and will present together. And the agenda that we will present today is basically we will browse the hydrogen value chain, including the different value chain steps and the related market players and the companies taking part to this value chain. And with two focus, one on electrolysis and the other one on fuel cell, that are key elements of the hydrogen industry today. And then on the last part, we will have the conclusion. So moving on to the hydrogen value chain, we are basically describing today the perimeter that is highlighted in orange in this slide. That is from production to distribution and the fuel cell included also, so part of what is sometimes referred to as usage. Knowing that moving on from the production of hydrogen to the usage, we've got multiple usage that I will comment in a few seconds. Situation today is we produce hydrogen mainly from fossil fuel in this market as of today, and electrolysis is a new type of usage to produce hydrogen in a cleaner way with, for example, clean energy from renewables like wind or solar. Other ways to produce hydrogen is through reforming or partial oxidation or even gasification of coal. And what is important to know is that it's mainly fossil as of today. We have mainly what we call gray hydrogen produced as of 2021. It's mainly from fossil origin. Moving on to the different steps of the value chain. So after we produce the hydrogen, there is a need to store it. And as it's a very volatile gas, we have several challenges, and it can be done in various ways. We can store it into a gaseous format inside the gas tank, in a liquefied format, so very often what is called also cryogenic storage. and via carriers, whether solid or liquid, that help to transport hydrogen in a, let's say, more let's say, easier manner than through big gas tanks or liquid tanks. Then comes the another step of the value chain, the refueling. So refueling, that is the distribution, basically, of the hydrogen that has been stored and produced to enable the different usage that you're seeing here to consume this hydrogen. So we can have like a refueling station for mobility, or we can have just a tank that delivers that directly to, for example, a generator set or other usage. Basically, this last step that we will just comment very quickly is the usage. So as I mentioned, as this hydrogen produced today is mainly for industrial feedstock. So we are talking about a significant quantity, between 60 and 90 million tons of hydrogen that is being consumed mainly by industrial application. So that's the most mature application as of today. And moving on to fuel cell based usage, we have then the usage for some application like electricity generator set, basically a hydrogen gen set that aims to replace basically diesel gen set or gas gen sets. And that's one of the most mature. So it's a stationary application and one of the most mature application today, together with forklifts, cars, so personal cars. And in order of decreasing maturity, we have, of course, some buses, hydrogen buses that are being deployed today, but still early stage of deployments. It's still just happening for the past few years. And trucks in, let's say, even a slightly lower maturity than buses, trains. So, of course, you've seen all announcements on this domain as well. And the least mature usage that we have into the hydrogen value chain today are basically aviation and big maritime transportation, and, of course, home usage that is not very much developed as of today. So that's basically, the focus we're going to have today is to describe the upper part of the value chain, so the upstream part of the value chain, everybody that are making the systems to supply basically, or to meet those usage. So this industry is basically made of almost 1,000 companies worldwide. We are building this statistic basically using a database that we have developed, that is a database of 970 companies as of today, and keeps on growing. And from this database, we have made statistics that we are going to present to you today. And this first statistics, so 1,000 companies worldwide, and the countries with the biggest number of companies today are the countries highlighted in darker shades in this slide. Basically, USA with approximately 200 companies, China with around 100 companies identified, Germany, France also in the range of 80, 120 companies, and then coming decreasingly in the amount of company, Japan, South Korea, and UK. These are basically the top countries in terms of company count on the value chain, all type of technologies and components included. The size of the market is interesting aspect. So those 1,000 companies are serving basically $120 billion market. And as mentioned, if we take into account 60 or 90 million tons of hydrogen produced, This basically makes a very cheap hydrogen because it's fossil in the range of $1.3 per kilo. And this is the situation for the gray hydrogen, so not the renewable one that is known to be more expensive than this. But this is mainly to give you ideas about the size of the market, the amount of companies that are serving this market. Zooming on to the industry, we also made an interesting statistic that is basically the share of those the companies that are being presented into this 970 panel. These are mainly large companies, so 30% of those employees are large companies, and then we've got small and medium-sized companies that are the biggest part of the database. These includes, of course, startups, so 130 startups that are also contributing to the innovation and the development of new solutions into this industry. Knowing that larger companies are usually entering the market and diversifying as a provider of solution, whereas SMEs are usually the one fueling the innovation. And of course, both meet and are being acquired. And as a last statistic on those companies, we estimated this amount of companies represent approximately 1 million employees altogether. Then I will hand over to Alice Jacquet. Alice is an analyst on hydrogen in my team, and she will present the next slide from now on.
Okay, so thank you, Fabrice. Hello again, everybody. Here you have the hydrogen value chain detailed by different steps that we decided to build in order to better understand the renewable hydrogen market and the associated players. So you have the hydrogen value chain as we build it. And so Fabrice just said that we are talking about approximately 1,000 identified companies. But here, if you make the total of all companies positioned on each value chain steps, you will see that the total is above the 1,000 companies. And the reason is that you will find on this hydrogen value chain vertically integrated companies that are providing and are positioned on different steps. For example, you will have large groups that are providing both materials, components, but also storage technologies, etc. So on the hydrogen value chain, we will find companies involved, for example, in the hydrogen production, the storage solution, and also fuel cell manufacturing. You have many pioneers in this industry that are pure players, that is to say that their activities are only focusing on hydrogen topics, but you will also find well-established large manufacturers and a large group that are basically diversified companies that will have also a key role on this hydrogen value chain. So we have to remember that the hydrogen value chain is a mix of different companies with different activities and related services. We see through this value chain that we decided to integrate and to begin the value chain at the material level because the developments of materials is essential to ensure the efficiency of different systems. So you will find in this hydrogen value chain, you will find in the materials steps, for example, membrane, catalyst, etc., that will be parts of components which will be produced thanks to these materials. And then you will integrate these different components into the different steps of the value chain, such as the production systems and also the fuel cell systems. So, for example, on the production side, you will find the electrolysis technologies, but you will also find different technologies, such as, for example, hydrogen production thanks to waste use. Then, once you have produced this hydrogen, you will have to store it and to transport it. So we find in this hydrogen value chain step competitive technologies that will depend on the usage and the storage requirements, because, for example, if you need long-term storage or if you will need long-distance transportation, you won't choose the same technology to transport or to store it. But today, we have to remember that 60% of hydrogen storage technologies providers are on gaseous storage, but lots of companies are developing other technologies such as solid or liquid carriers. And finally, when we have produced and then stored and transport this hydrogen, we have to use it. And one way to use it is to use fuel cells. And in this fuel cell system, you will find subcomponents such as fuel cell stacks or balance of plant equipments. That is a set of different components and equipments. And finally, you will find the hydrogen distribution systems. That is basically hydrogen refueling station, which is made of different components like compressor, pumps, heat exchanger, etc. Next slide, please, Fabrice. Okay, so we talked about and we presented the hydrogen value chain, but here the important thing is to look at the geographical distribution of the suppliers present in the hydrogen value chain. So we can determine from this slide and analysis that there are 3 main regions in the world that are developing technologies, and they are quite distributed equally. So you see that there is a competition between Europe, North America, and Asia, and this competition is set for each region to become, to try to become at least the leader on the hydrogen market. At each step of the value chain, you can see that we have identified a minimum of 100 companies because there is a big challenge, a key challenge at each steps. For example, you have to develop electrolyzer systems or fuel cell system, but you have to ensure the best efficiency and the best cost, you have to, to have the cost efficiency, and you have to improve the efficiency of all subsystems and finally systems. So now we looked at the hydrogen value chain and a global overview, and then thanks to the next slide, we will jump into the electrolysis system. So today on the market, if we look at the data, we have a small, a tiny installed capacity in terms of electrolysis. So the capacity installed is still limited, but the hydrogen, we have to remember data that is the hydrogen produced today by electrolysis way accounts for less than 2% of the total amount of hydrogen on the market. But as I said, challenge is to reduce costs of systems, and a way to do that is to massify installed capacities of electrolyzers. And this massification will allow renewable hydrogen to be competitive with gray hydrogen, which is today the most widespread hydrogen. And a way to be competitive with gray hydrogen, we must reach a cost of renewable hydrogen lower than $2 per kilo. So on this slide, you have different sources that set different targets in terms of capacities, electrolysis capacities to produce large-scale hydrogen. The point is to produce hydrogen at large-scale level, you have to set a goal, which is to manufacture systems at large-scale level. And this is the subject of the next slide. So Fabrice, please. Thank you. Today, on the electrolyzer systems, we find three main technologies supplied by electrolyzers players. We find first the alkaline technology, which is today the most mature technology and thus the most installed. But you can see on this slide that PEM suppliers represented the majority of electrolysis system supplier, and they account for approximately 40% of total electrolyzer suppliers. And finally, you have a remaining technology, which is called solid oxide electrolysis, that accounts today for approximately 10% of the solid oxide of the PEM, the electrolyzer technology suppliers. And that is why this technology is still at a nearly stage level of maturity, but has promising advantages. So there is a strong focus on this technology. To increase, that is the point, the installed capacity, we have to deploy mass manufacturing factories. And so you probably heard about recent annonces about gigafactories. And you will find on these different annonces leading and well-known suppliers that have announced that they will build or expand their manufacturing capacities to gigawatt scale in order to reach competitiveness at system level and produced hydrogen cost level. So these investments in gigafactories are led by medium and large companies such as Nel or McPhy or Siemens Energy that you probably know. In this slide, you have the largest supplier, but a full list of all the suppliers is also available in our dedicated database. So now we will focus on the use of the produced hydrogen, and we have now a zoom on fuel cell technology. So fuel cell market expansion is undeniably linked to the massification of renewable hydrogen production, as if we produce hydrogen at large scale, we have to use it. Expected usage of renewable hydrogen are industrial in order to decarbonize the industry, but hydrogen is also expected to decarbonize this transportation sector, so the mobility sector. And here you have a study from E4Tech that had established that today almost 75% of fuel cells that are used on the market are used for mobility purposes. Stationary usage accounts for a quarter of these uses and represent, for example, emergency power, such as gensets that Fabrice told earlier. Here, again, you have large companies that are making some announcements as for example, Hyundai, that intends, for example, to massify fuel cell power trucks by producing lots of fuel cell systems. And so now that we have talked about the markets, let's have a look about the fuel cell system and the associated technologies. So we see in the fuel cell system that we have three main technology. So undeniably PEM technology, which is a reverse principle of PEM electrolysis process, accounts for almost half of the system suppliers. Other technologies such as solid oxide or direct methanol fuel cells are also present, but there are fewer suppliers. As for electrolysis systems, the challenge is here to massify the uses and therefore to massify the production of the systems. So again, you have well-known players and well-established players, as for example, Canadian supplier Ballard or Bosch, that are planning to build or expand their current manufacturing capacities to gigawatt scale in order, once again, to decrease cost system and to be cost competitive. So investments on fuel cell system manufacturing are at gigawatt scale, and you will find these gigafactory projects led by medium and large companies. So here again, you have the main suppliers represented in this slide, but we are able to provide a complete list of fuel cell systems provider at a worldwide level. So after this quick brief on renewable hydrogen and markets, I would like to conclude by saying that there are many developments that are coming in the short term, and I will leave the floor to Fabrice for the last slide. We will finish by presenting our services related to hydrogen at Enerdata.
Okay, thank you, Alice. To conclude and summarize, so basically all those analyses we presented are based on the database, as we mentioned, that includes over 970 companies that we update on a regular basis, and that spans all along the hydrogen value chain, from components to material to components and subsystem to the system themselves. So it's exhaustive in terms of browsing the number of companies, and it's detailed, including the technology detail and some also information about the companies themselves. So that's our global hydrogen company database. With the content you can see on the screen right now. And also wanted to mention that we are able to provide also custom consulting services, typically market research. We are able to address technological innovation like we have done already in the past. For example, for a new type of system on the hydrogen value chain or a new type of components. We have some engineering background, so we're able to get into the technical detail, but our added value is mainly into finding a path to access the market and quantify and qualify this market. We're also able to make some benchmarking analysis. As you have seen, this database is, with this actor mapping, is able to provide some interesting data that we can, of course, develop and, for example, investigate in the technical field, the product portfolio field, the financial field or economic field. All those capabilities are open for custom analysis on this. And finally, last but not least, we have already done some due diligence of startups. So basically assessing the technology and the market for investors. So that's one last capacity we have for custom consulting. Thank you for listening to us today. So you have here into the slide our contact information or emails. We have seen some questions, and I think we can start to answer those questions live. Pascal, maybe you wanted to answer to one question in particular? Okay, so that is clear. So there was a question from Marine. In particular on what we have included into our value chain. So why not include upstream, renewable and gas? So it is indicated, but not highlighted. But yes, you're right. It is part of the value chain. And you also a question about including transport into this value chain. And yes, again, you're right. Into this database today, we have not this category, but we did custom work on this particular part. Pipeline, blending with natural gas are very important thematic being discussed today. So this is outside of the scope of the database, but this is something also we have worked on. Then there was another question from Zlata about the hydrogen companies per country. How did we calculate it? And did we consider hydrogen to be as a primary activity to include those companies? And how about their announcement of companies? So let me explain a little bit how we work onto this database. We basically include into the database the companies that are an offer available on hydrogen technology, whatever the technology, whatever the step of the value chain. So this is our first rule. They need to be open on the market on their offer. Of course, if they are in stealth mode, we won't have them in our list, and that's why we keep on expanding it, because sooner or later they hit the market, and we see them when they appear on the market. So we don't take into account announcement. And to answer those the point of primary activity to be included into the database, in fact, we have this level of detail if the company is considered as a pure player, so primary activity is hydrogen for them, or if it's a diversified company. And that's typically the case of larger groups. For example, Toyota is active into the field of hydrogen at the fuel cell level, for example, and at other steps as well. So they are into the database, but they are as a diversified large company. So that's the rule about how we made, let's say, the inclusion of those companies into our database, and the statistics you've seen by country consider what I've just explained. Then we had another question from François. To address the clean energy sources to feed the green hydrogen production process. So the question is, will you address those clean energy sources like wind, solar, nuclear, etc.? So yes, we have the ability to go into those details. This is not in the scope of the database, but through our clean tech unit activity, we have worked on this topic. So we have worked on, for example, solar or wind power plant supplying an electrolyzer, and even supplying a hydrogen refueling station. So yes, we have the ability, but in custom mode on demand. I will answer on this. Many other questions. Alice, let me know if you want to take some of those questions as well. There was a question from Peter on what's the total production capacity for the manufacturing of electrolyzer. So usually when we made our analysis on this domain for the manufacturing of electrolyzer, we took into account the plans per company and per site. So if, for example, a company is announcing the construction of an electrolyzer manufacturing unit, for example, like we had in Europe. Don't remember the name, but let's say in that case, we take into account the name of the company, we take into account the site, and we take into account the production capacity of that plant. So we go into the detail. It's not part of the database as such. It's a separate study that is made on top of the database, because this is related, of course, to the database. And it's mainly announcement. And if the factory is existing and we have data on that, of course, we include this data so we can have the current production capacity and the plan capacity with the timeline, if it's going to be into 1, 2, or 3, 5 years. Coming up with another question, plenty of questions, thank you. So Alain is asking a question on using turbine and reciprocating engine powered by hydrogen. For example, typically a hydrogen motor. So here we talk about burning hydrogen into an engine instead of using a fuel cell. And this is an excellent question, Alain, and I think we are adding this category in particular for motors because in fact using hydrogen directly into the motor, burning it into a motor is being seriously considered by mobility actors, and in particular for heavy mobility. And it's indeed an alternative to using a fuel cell. And I think the driver using fossil fuel will love it because it's making some noise, and you can enjoy a feeling similar to diesel. So this is an emerging technology, by the way, that we are going also to include into our database. Moving on to another question from Antonio. So do we have technical data? So on the technology, such as details on electrolyzer offer and the fuel cell, we don't have this technical data into the database. For example, you will see that actor X has an electrolyzer system and maybe a stack or components or material, but you won't know the performance, you won't know the technical detail. This can be done, but it's not inside the database, and this is typically done on a custom basis. And of course, on limited basis, because we cannot provide such detail on every of the 970 companies we have in the database today. Then another question from Changhu, Mr. Lee. So your question is on transportation, and in particular in Asian countries and companies focusing on ammonia as a hydrogen carrier. So yes, so there is indeed this alternative, and this is part of the carriers we mentioned. So whether liquid, so I guess it's in the liquid form, and there is currently indeed your question is on how is it competitive versus liquid hydrogen. And there has been several studies on this field, and some of them recently published to compare so the transport via gaseous tanks compared to ammonia, compared to liquid hydrogen, and even compared to LOHC, so that's the liquid organic hydrogen carriers. I cannot go into those details, but there are studies, and we have studied that. We also made a paper, so we published a paper, Alice published a paper on this particular topic of LOHC compared to ammonia, for example. And you can find it on our website. I think it may still be on the Infinergia website, but we can send that a link to those publications and to this paper in particular. Plenty of questions. So I have another question from Mr. Olsen. I won't pronounce the first name because I'm sure I will spoil it. So the growth of number of companies, also an interesting question. What I can say is that this database, as we have started this database back in 2017, it's already several years ago, and it has been growing consistently. We have not made directly statistics on that, but typically we have seen an important increase in terms of number of companies. I think 2 or 3 years ago, the database was approximately at 500 level, and we're reaching now 1,000. So gives you an idea. Of course, we added categories as well, but yeah, more and more companies getting into this field. The best example being the mobility companies, all the motor companies and mobility, so car makers, truck makers, bus makers that are getting into this field very seriously, and of course their suppliers. So it's growing. I cannot give you a precise number, but it's growing strong. And this is the statistic I can give you. It has at least doubled over the past 3 to 4 years. And what region? This is even more difficult to answer. So what region and what part of the value chain? There is investment everywhere. There is investment in every region. Of course, Asia and China in particular, but also USA, Europe, and other maybe even countries we didn't mention here. So there is really a lot of investment everywhere in the world and all along the value chain, not only on the key elements like fuel cell or electrolyzer, but also on subsystems and so on. Moving on to another question from Jan. How did we evaluate the hydrogen produced by nuclear? Did we evaluate the hydrogen produced by nuclear electricity? Is it counted as a green energy source? That's a good question. Today, we consider mainly the way we transform a given material into hydrogen. And this can be done through electrolysis, or this can be done, for example, by breaking molecules of fossil material, fossil fuel, into hydrogen. In the case of electrolysis, we don't consider if the electricity is coming from wind, solar, or nuclear. We just take into account into this database again that we have an electrolyzer that is supplied by electricity. And the debate on nuclear electricity, is it green or not green? I will have the very standard answers that we have today. It's considered as low carbon, and there is a big debate on accounting it as green. Today, green or renewable is mainly solar, wind, and other energy from the sea, for example. We have a different. There is a different definition. Not only we, but there is a definition for nuclear electricity that is usually not accounted as renewable as such. But there can be a debate on that. Moving on, maybe take 1 or 2 more questions, because I think we're reaching our limit in terms of time. Let me check some of the questions. So there's the point of applying hydrogen to planes. Here today is not really the goal of this discussion, because this is related to usage, and yes, there is a challenge clearly.
Yes, maybe one question from Andre. That is, are we going to indicate implemented project and project on the planning and implementation stage? And that is a good question, because at Enerdata, we have a product that is called Power Plant Tracker, and which establish all the projects, the operational project, but also development projects that are related to production of energy. So every kind of energy, which can be hydroelectricity, photovoltaics, etc. And current last extension was to introduce to these power plant databases the hydrogen, the electrolysis capacities. So yes, we can provide a list of the different implemented projects and the project on the planning regarding this topic.
Okay. Thank you, Alice, and thank you for all your question. I think it's now time to, okay, so maybe one other comment.
Yes, Pascal speaking again. Thank you for all the answers. So what Fabrice and Alice presented basically is the database that is currently existing, but we are very much looking forward investing and developing this service into a wider hydrogen service. So there is a lot of questions where either we have already the answer in the database. There are many ideas and questions about the next steps. So thank you for these inputs, because when we say sometimes we have it today in a custom way, it means we can also enlarge and develop the standard service that we will be doing. So we are looking forward to getting additional input from you in that respect to develop a wider service. So at this stage, we have this actors monitoring database, which is very large and that we wanted to introduce, and with the analysis that goes with it. But we will definitely continue and launch this service in the very near future. So thank you for these inputs, and do not hesitate to continue giving us ideas on these next steps.
Thank you, Pascal. I think that will be the sentence of the end. So thank you again for participating. We will come back to you on the question we didn't answer, and feel free again to contact us for further details. And thank you for participating. I wish you a very nice day or end of day. So goodbye.